website at arbutusfolkschool.org. And with that, I hope I got everything. I'm going to hand it over to Candace. And I'm probably going to mute myself, but I'll unmute if I need to. All right. Thanks, Candace.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello. Welcome, everybody. So like Stacy said, I'm a CPA and I have my MBA, and I've been, like I like to say, I've been playing with other people's money since 1995. I started in the banking industry and did all sorts of aspects of different banking, and then went into mortgages and ended up being an accountant. So, and I fell into it kind of by happenstance, and then was a non-traditional student, got my accounting degree, and then went back to grad school for an MBA. So I primarily work with nonprofits. They're about 75% of my accounting services clients. And then the other 25% are a variety of small businesses, and then just off and on some consultation for folks that just need a little bit of help business planning or figuring out the myriad of things that come with running and owning your own business. So I thought what we would do, because bookkeeping is generally very specific to your type of business that you're operating. And is everybody, with a thumbs up, is everybody here doing bookkeeping stuff for their own artwork? Yes, 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 okay. So you have a little bit of a different niche in the fact that you buy supplies, and you probably have more supplies than you have, like you're selling things. So sometimes you have some supplies left over. How many of you do it as a hobby and don't claim any income or anything like that on your tax return? And how many, with a raise of a hand or whatever? Or do you all have your own business income that's on your taxes too? Yeah, okay. So let's just take a minute and open up we'll unmute folks for a second and open up the conversation to what I want to know is what your biggest struggle is with accounting, other than the fact that it's not everybody's forte. You're not in the jewelry making business to be an accountant. And that's true for most folks in small businesses. So what is your biggest struggle, and what do you hope to take from today's workshop? Fire away.
Well, I'll start. I've been flying under the wire for about 30 years, and now I'm going legit. So I have taxes to do. And I have managed to get unemployment because I've been teaching for all those years. So I did have some record keeping, but I never wanted to indulge before because it's a headache.
Mm-hmm. I hear that a lot. What is your no longer under the radar work that you're doing?
Oh, I teach painting.
Oh, painting. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, in the past, it just was too much of a headache, not just because of my brain style, but because I was raising 4 children, had a husband, had to do too many things, and it just couldn't have happened, I don't believe, unless I was really motivated to get somebody else to do it for me. And that's a job too.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, though, I'm here to learn. So it's not about the past, it's about the future right now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
JT, you had something to say?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that the most challenging part of the bookkeeping, I mean, it's kind of been an evolving challenge, and it kind of continues to be. There's always something new that I'm learning. But QuickBooks, you know, like making the switch to QuickBooks was daunting, but so useful in a lot of ways. But then, you know, I think the hardest part for me is the infrequency. You know, I only do it periodically. It's not my full-time job as the bookkeeper. And I mean, I do all our bookkeeping. We're organized as an LLC. There's myself and Nikki, and then we, you know, we're employees. So there's payroll and all the taxes and stuff like that. But I feel like one of the greatest things that we did was we have a bookkeeper who I can call periodically, and she's really very helpful in demystifying QuickBooks for me, or whatever tax form I get mailed in the mail because I forgot to do something. I tuned in because every time I talk to an accountant, I learn something that helps me. And even if I take away one thing from this conversation, I'll be so happy to have that tool for the future. So thanks.
How about you, Sam?
I'm pretty diligent about keeping track of my financials, but I'm not 100% certain I'm doing it correctly.
Okay.
And so I think I need to maybe also pass it off to somebody. Like maybe I do need to get a bookkeeper, maybe I do need to get an accountant, and then I can just still be diligent about keeping track of things, but then I can just hand it off to someone who knows all the things that I don't think I'll ever know because I'm not going to study that stuff, right? So I don't know, I'm here today to listen and, you know, learn and kind of see if I am right in that I do need to hand it off to somebody, hire somebody else, you know, or if this is something I can still keep tackling. So appreciate all of this.
The good news is, as long as you're consistent, you're probably not doing it wrong. So there's that. And then JT, you use QuickBooks Online or desktop?
I use it. It's on our desktop. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So that's been a challenge because I don't want to pay to update it.
Right.
So, you know, it has fallen behind in its utility in some ways. Like I can't download stuff directly from our bank any longer. But you know, as time has come, and addressing what Sam was saying, you know, about paying, you know, like maybe getting someone else in, that I think that's money well spent because, you know, for me, it was setting up, learning. Yeah. Like I have a calendar of stuff like on the end of the month, I need to do these 3 things. I need to send in these tax forms, and I have the addresses written down, and having a person who went through with me, you know, went through it, all that with me so that I wasn't missing deadlines, especially for tax filings and stuff like that, was super, super helpful because, you know, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I find with a lot of folks when I have meetings with people that it's like, I'm going to start this business. What do I need to know? And that's always the question. Do you have employees? Are you planning to hire employees? You know, what have you filed all your business license requirements with all the different cities and the state and all of those things, and just mapping out and putting little reminders, however it is that you remind yourself about what those tax deadlines are as far as bookkeeping goes. So, but the nice thing is whether you're using QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online, there's also, if you're still in Excel, that's fine. It's just a matter of as long as you're consistent with keeping track of the money coming in and the money going out. And I think the most important thing that I try to relay to people is to run it like a business and keep it separate from your personal accounts makes it so much easier. And also, if there's ever in a tax situation where you would have an IRS audit, if you've kept it separately, then they're not going to question your birthday check from grandma as revenue, right? Because you can show that you have 2 separate things, one for personal, one for business. So that's a key thing. One of the questions that we had was when's the right time to hire a bookkeeper rather than doing it yourself. And it's different for everyone, but my recommendation is to hire a bookkeeper is when you feel like you're doing more bookkeeping than you are
Losing you.
running your business, because at that point in time, you're losing revenue, right? And the amount of time that you're going to save in hiring somebody who can probably do it faster is going to be exponential for growth for your business, because you can focus more on marketing and building customer relationships and talking to your students in the classes, or you have time for promo conventions and different sorts of marketing and outreach that you can do. It's not plugging in what your expenses are. I would say though, to save yourself some time, you'd want to probably update your software to where, because there are a lot of things, and this is what's new in the bookkeeping world. There's a lot of software out there. I can post in the chat the free software that some folks use. It's called Wave Apps. Let me post it. And it's 100% free, and they will link to your bank account. And then all you have to do is tell it what type of expense it is. They help with invoicing if you invoice people, or you can just record your deposits as revenue. It is a free version, so there are some limitations, but it works for the most part in keeping track of what money is coming in and what money is going out. And that's basically the basics of bookkeeping. Tracking. And what happens when you get a bookkeeper is that they have a little bit more nuanced categorization of those expenses, so that you can adequately plug them into the right places on your Schedule C, or your other tax forms that you use if you do something bigger than a Schedule C. The thing that I like to say is also to keep track of, so as artists, especially when you're buying what we like to call in accounting world raw materials, right? You're basically a manufacturing industry. You're manufacturing something from raw materials to turn it into an end product that is what you then sell. And that's what, and those things are what we in bookkeeping call cost of goods sold. I don't know if everybody's heard of that, but when you buy something that's then going to turn into a cost of goods, or you're going to turn into something else, we consider that cost of goods sold. As far as instruction for teaching, though, you would just have job supplies or materials, because you're teaching the student something rather than taking a painting and then selling the painting.
Or both.
Yeah. And then what I like to recommend to everybody too is you just have gross sales as your revenue type, unless you want to really keep track of, this is how much I'm making from jewelry sales, and I also do, I'm a weaver or something, and so I also sell tapestry. And if you want to keep track of how each one of those categories are doing, that would be a good time to hire a bookkeeper. And then it's, and then because you'd want to track the expenses associated with it as well. But that's really when you start to become a little bit more diverse in what you're offering. As long as you just have one primary thing that you're selling, then your revenue account can just be sales of whatever. And that makes it really easy. And if you look at, I'll share my screen with you for a second. I've pulled up a Schedule C. And I know we have a tax one coming up, but the reason why I talk about this schedule, can everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay. For whatever reason, my whole computer just did weird stuff. But so with this Schedule C, you'll see here that it's really just your sales. They don't really care about much else. And then your cost of goods, and then that gives you your gross profit. But what I like about this Schedule C, and you can Google it, And the IRS puts all of these blank PDFs out there for everyone, which is really nice. But the Schedule C Part 2 section is what houses all of the different types of expenses that you could have with your small business. So what I like to do is to categorize the types of expenses into those, because then you can prepare your own Schedule C. You don't need to pay somebody lots of money, or depends on the accountant really how much they charge you, but you don't have to pay somebody at that point to plug those numbers in for you, because that's what I tell people tax returns are. It's just putting the right number in the right box. But if you had a good idea of like, this is how much I've spent on advertising, this is how much I've spent on payroll or office supplies or travel, then that's how, those are the minimum categories that you'll want, are the ones that are on the tax form that you're preparing. And the nice thing about it is if something doesn't fit nice and neatly into these boxes, the bottom section is other, and you can name it, you can name whatever you want. So if you have something that you don't think fits neatly into this area up here, you can, a lot of people put like telephone and internet, because that's a tax deduction, right? We all, especially in this day and age, need the internet to do our work. And if you have your cell phone listed on a business card or on your website for whatever you're selling, that's a tax deduction. So, so the basic, go ahead.
When it comes to phone and internet and sharing like your personal expenses with business expenses, how do you divide that up? Like I have a home studio, so I do take the square footage and like, subtract that from my rent. And so if you could go into detail on like best practices on how to do that.
Sure. So with your home office deduction, and this is something that we'll probably go into more detail in the next session, which is about taxes. But what I tell people to do is just track the expenses associated with your home office or where you live and where you work separately from your bookkeeping expenses for the actual business, because as there's other deductions on here on the Schedule C that that will feed into it. So you have a home office section. Where is the home office section? Well, anyway, we'll get more into the home office deduction on the tax return one. But what I tell people to keep track of is the total square footage of your space that you use for work versus the total square footage of your home. So, and that includes like garage, and if you have a shed in the backyard, include that as well if you use it for storage or whatever. Keep track of all your utility bills. So electric, gas, water, sewer, your internet can be used. But the thing that I caution folks is look at your bill for the internet, especially if you bundle and you have like internet and TV all in the same one. The only portion that's really deductible is your internet. Most people working from a home office don't utilize their TV for business. But if your cell phone is your primary phone, I only have a cell phone. I don't have an office phone. And because people call me for business and I get 100% of my business from that cell phone number, I just consider it a business expense and I don't split it out. So I pay that from my business account and I track it as telephone expense in my accounting. So a question here too is, does that answer your question on the home office?
Yeah.
Okay. And you can also keep track of, well, so Bob, my partner, is a general contractor, and he met with somebody yesterday who is also an artist, and she wants to transform her garage into a studio. And though it does improve her home, so it could be considered home improvements, but because she's doing it for her business, then that could be something that would be repairs or maintenance and improvements for your business. So even general repairs like a roof leak or windows or whatever, keep track of those, because a portion of any repairs and maintenance to maintain that office space is also something that is an expense to your business. If you think about it, if you had an office somewhere else or a studio somewhere else and the water pipe broke and you had to fix it, that's a repairs and maintenance expense to your business. So the same is in consideration if your business is run from a home office. And then anything that you don't have, anything that you're like, I don't know, that would be a good time to call a bookkeeping or accounting professional and get some opinions on what they feel is the most likely IRS determination, because that's really what we're talking about, is what does the IRS feel is a tax deduction and what's not. And it used to be that people could deduct like meals. There was this meals and entertainment business expense where if you meet with some potential clients or something like that, then you could write off a portion of that as an expense to your business as well. So if you take a client out for coffee, or say somebody wants to meet with you to talk about wholesale, and they want to order a bunch of stuff, and you meet over dinner, a portion of that expense is a write-off. So I would keep track of those as well within your bookkeeping software as a meals expense. You can't take people to entertainment venues anymore, but I mean, you can if you want to, but it's just not something that I would record as an expense in your accounting.
Candace, is there a threshold that you think is kind of a red flag to the IRS? Like if you put 50% of your house expenses are business related, that could be true if your office is in the middle of your living room and you have a studio apartment and pretty much your living room is your office, or that might be true, but is there anything that you think would be a red flag to the IRS?
Yeah. So the thing to note about home office deductions, and we'll probably go into more detail about this too on the next one, is that it has to be a dedicated space. And it's really challenging if you get audited by the IRS to prove that you have a dedicated space unless you can demonstrate, like with my home office, it's this corner. We have the office set up. We don't use this desk or that desk for anything other than working. They might dispute it because it is in an open area of a room, but I really only write off like 8 feet by 8 feet. So it's not. Mm-hmm. So there's a point in time where you're like, is it even worth it? Because if your space overall is 2,000 square feet and you're using only 64 square feet of that 2,000 square it might not be worth the headache of tracking all of those expenses to take into action. But it's always worth looking into, especially if you have somebody else doing your taxes, that you can just be like, here's my total that I paid for my utilities, and they can figure it out. But you do have to document things in a way that that you can always go back and prove that you did have that home office. So if you lived in a studio apartment, chances are the IRS is going to say that's not a home office, because you can't really dedicate any one specific space, especially not 50% of a studio. So those are, and they are becoming more of a audit flag for home offices, because people were abusing it. And saying that their laptop that they use on their couch while they're watching TV is their home office. So it's become quite a hot button issue, and a lot of folks are seeing that expense goes away. So something to consider. But and just tracking it outside of what your normal bookkeeping software does, whether it's in Excel or just a manual calculation, or if you just keep your bills in a file electronically or whatever and add it up at the end of the year.
I realized
and that's the other thing too with like your vehicle. So a lot of the bookkeeping software now also has, I know QuickBooks Online for self-employed has a section called mileage, and you can download the QuickBooks Online app on your phone, and it'll GPS track wherever you drive, and you can Tinder it to swipe left or swipe right if it's business or personal. And it's really handy, because that's generally, and you can make notes like client meeting, and you can put the client's name in there, because the IRS likes to see, how many miles were driven, the date you drove them, what the purpose and intent of was the meeting, and your location. And so a lot of the, and there's another app called Mile IQ that will do that. Or you can go old school like my dad did and just keep a ledger in the truck, and he'd write down his mileage all the time, because that's another thing that you don't necessarily track in your bookkeeping software. But if you are using your vehicle for work purposes, then like Pamela, if you load up your car with all of your jewelry when you're going to go to a show, then that mileage is work related as far as your business goes.
Yeah. So. How do you calculate what that is, as far as, just like the cost of gas, and then also vehicle maintenance?
Yeah, so you can do you can track it in two different ways. And what I tell folks is that the IRS mileage reimbursement rate, which is for 2020 is 0.575 cents per mile, generally covers the work portion of your vehicle usage. So you can either track it just by keeping your mileage log and then reporting it that way, or you can track it by actual expenses, but you still have to keep a mileage log between personal usage and work usage. So what generally ends up happening is that most folks, you don't want to keep all your gas receipts and total them up, and you don't want to keep all your maintenance and your tire replacement and all of that stuff. So they end up just doing the standard deduction, which is pretty generous, unless you have some major repairs. And then that year you might want to switch to the non-standard deduction and keep track of all those expenses. But it is based off of, similar to the home office, it's based off of the percentage of time that you used, the percentage of miles you drove for work versus the total sum of all of the miles you drove all year. So that's why one of those apps is really nice, because it keeps track of your business and personal separate. And most of the bookkeeping software out there has some sort of addition or add-on. Not the desktop software, unfortunately. They haven't kind of gotten up to speed with that, but yeah. And then as far as your timing, if you don't have payroll and you really hate doing the bookkeeping stuff, in order to keep up on it, I would say to at least consider tracking your stuff and getting it organized once a quarter. That should be plenty. A lot of times you can download your bank transactions into an Excel if you don't use software, and then you can just categorize them that way. Just like adding another column is what a lot of folks I work with do. They just add a column and put office supplies, or that's really what job supplies, professional services. And then they just kind of categorize it. Because when I get it as an accountant, if I'm not doing the bookkeeping, I can just filter by the category and do a subtotal sum on the Excel spreadsheet, which is really nice. So, and if you don't have a whole lot of transactions, you could probably even get away with doing that for a year, just once a year to get ready for your taxes. It depends on what your bank transaction download limitations are. But if you're working with software like this Wave app that a handful of my clients use, or if you use QuickBooks Online Self-Employed, or there's a whole host of them, Xero, FreshBooks, they all currently sync to your bank account. So you use your same sign-in information, and that's the same thing. They just bring the transactions in, and then you just have to go through them and tell the software what you bought on Amazon or what you bought at the store. Bless you. So, and that's really, and then once you're, and the software is kind of smart, it's not all the way smart, but if you know that you always buy clay from Clay Arts, for example, that's all you ever purchase from Clay Arts, you can set up rules in that software that say, whenever you see something that's Clay Arts, post it as cost of goods sold. And then it will autofill those things for you so that it saves you time. You can just review it and go, yep, that's right. And then you just add it that way, which is really fast and easy. It can get a little tricky because sometimes the software likes to pretend it knows more than you do and will say, oh, this Clay Arts supply really was health insurance when it's not. So it's pretty interesting, but most of the time it really depends on the level of transactions that you have and what kind of stuff is flowing in and out of your bank account. I think the struggle that most small businesses have that I see is that they have mixed their personal and their business account. And then that gets pretty messy. Or if they go to Fred Meyer, for example, or Target, or a place that could potentially sell office supplies, but they also sell things like, clothing and food, and they purchase business stuff at the same time as they purchase personal stuff. And that's another thing to keep track of too, is sometimes, even I do it, sometimes I'm like, oh, I left all of my work cards at work and I'm at Office Max and I'll just use my personal card, but then I forget to make that entry into my system, right? That I paid my own personal money and invested that $27.99 in my company by paying with it with my personal funds. So those are also things to keep track of when you pay cash for something, or when you're using your own personal funds. Make sure that you're putting those into your system as office supplies or job supplies or whatever, and then instead of taking it out of that business bank account, you would just post it to your, they call them equity accounts. So owner investment or owner contributions or whatever your software name is. And that's another thing too that folks ask me when they're starting up is, does my chart of accounts look right? And I'm like, why do you care about your chart of account? Most of the software will give you a template that is like, what's the type of business you have? And then they'll put something in there and that's good enough. But what I always tell people is if that doesn't make sense to you, make a new one that does, right? If you don't like the word office supplies and you'd rather call it paper and pens, that's cool. You know, there's nothing that's too inflexible with the way that you categorize things. And like I said, going back to the beginning, as long as you're consistent, as long as you always use paper and pens and you don't vacillate between paper and pens and office supplies. It's just a matter of being consistent with how you treat expenses.
Well, I thought I would chime in and just say I had to learn through Arbutus to keep two totally different wallets in my purse. So I have the Arbutus card and the Arbutus receipts in a totally different wallet because so many times I've grabbed the wrong card. Either I accidentally used the Arbutus card to buy my groceries, or I use my card to buy stuff for Arbutus, and then had to it's just like such a pain to try to straighten that out later. I just got separate wallets, and they don't look alike at all. They look totally different, and then the Arbutus receipts go right into the Arbutus one, and because the receipts were getting all mixed up, and so anyway, that's a little thing that I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's a good idea. When I was talking to my mom a while ago, years and years ago, about personal budgeting, and I told her to do the envelope method, right, where you put your money that you have to spend in all these separate envelopes, and then you only spend from the envelope as appropriate, which is challenging if you don't use cash only. But it's the same concept, like keeping things separate is a good idea, especially when you've got, like Stacy, if you added like selling your garden vegetables on top of it, you would have so many things going on in your life that it's just like, wow.
I would get a third wallet.
Yeah. And another thing that I find, or that a lot of folks find useful, is receipt capturing apps, so that you can, and most of them, if you're using an online software, or even if you're just filing it away, just take a picture and save it to a folder on your phone that's business receipts. Then you can easily retrieve them and you don't have to worry about them floating around in the car. You just take a picture right there at the counter before you leave the store. It's super fast and easy to just, and I like to save things in date order. I have a weird naming convention that I use. I'll type it in the chat. It's so like if I bought something today, I would say my date is 2/0 for 2020, and then it's May 29th. And then I'm gonna say I went to Ralph's. And then I'll put the dollar amount to like $54.68. And then that way, except for I don't use the period because that'll throw off your PDFs. That way it sorts it in chronological order by vendor alphabetically, and then it has the dollar amount. So if I'm like, what in the world? This bank thing came in and it says $72.33 to Ralph's on the 29th of May, but I don't have that receipt. I can go in and look at all the receipts that I have stored. I don't know if that showed up. There we go. I'll post it. Yeah. So you can just go in and look and go, oh, okay, that was a check that I wrote or something to somebody else. And it just makes it easier to have things in chronological order for me. But I like to, and you can just save it when you take the picture. You just like save it and then change the file name, and it takes, just a couple of seconds, and it saves you a lot of time in the long run when you're trying to filter through. You could even, instead of, you could even add the category on there. especially if you're using Excel as your bookkeeping software, you can just add the category on there so that when you pull your transactions from your bank, or if you like to type them in by yourself, either way, you can just pull up that file folder, and it's really easy to just read what category of things that you shopped for. That way you don't have to open up that receipt every time to see what you bought. So in this instance, it would be like Ralph's, and then I would say postage or whatever, because I don't know what I would buy at Ralph's, but yeah, those are just some handy tips and tricks that I've found over the days, is just doing things immediately if you can to save the information is really helpful. It helps you, it helps your accountant if you send your stuff off to an accountant. And there's no wrong way to do your bookkeeping. You could take all of your receipts and put them in a box and then turn them into your accountant. They're not going to be very happy with you, and they'll probably charge you a lot of money to do your tax return, but they'll still do it because they're, you know, it's the information that they're provided. So there's no wrong way. There's just efficient or inefficient, right? And whatever works with whatever type of brain you are. As you were saying, Ellen, you're totally different brain spectrum than the left side analytical. I'm going to put all of these things into the right compartment and do it right now.
Can I chime in on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Like the strategies that I've found that work for me, definitely not being whatever left or right brain, whatever it is that's analytical. We have a business credit card, and it's just, you know, everything goes on that business credit card, because at the end of the month, like that statement comes back, and then it's easily trackable. You know, I pay that, you know, I pay it monthly.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a challenge when two people have business cards to keep track of expenses by the month, but on the bigger picture, you know, it works really well for us, especially because there are two of us that are using the business account. You know, it all comes back, and then I can track more easily when I do bookkeeping. Like, you know, there aren't missing receipts, you know. But but when it was just me, you know, definitely keeping all my receipts was so key. But you know, but then, you know, now that the bank card, you know, like a debit card is so ubiquitous, you know, that the same thing with it's just. And then having consistency in what you do, I think has been, because I know I'm not going to remember in 3 days what I spent $3.50 on.
Right.
You know, I know that's not my way. So just having something that is, I just do something, do it always the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That's been so much, that has made my life so much easier, and not having to go back and fight those battles.
Yeah. Yeah. Another challenge that I've had folks ask me about, especially people who are artists, is how do you differentiate between the cost for your business and if you're doing something for yourself, right? Like if I were to take a handful of the shawls that I've made recently, and or hats or whatever I'm making, sweaters, and sell some of them, but some of them I want to keep for myself, right? But I bought the yarn on my business account. How do you then say what's the value? Or so those are kind of some of the really tricky things. Like I bought all of this yarn, and some of it I made a sweater for myself, and the rest of it I made sweaters for other people and sold it. And I think those are the real big challenges, because then you just have to say, well, what was the value of the yarn that I used? And if you're not paying yourself a wage, then that's the only cost you have to worry about, is just what cost went into it. And for yarn, it's really easy, because I'm like, this price tag is on this skein or this hank, and it's, you know, $32.50 a skein, and I used 5. Super simple. And then you would just take that out of your expenses and post it as an owner distribution, right? Because you can take the cash and everything out of your company at any point in time as an LLC or a sole proprietor, because you're paying taxes on the full amount at the end of the year.
That becomes
But
income.
I think those are the challenges, especially like with jewelry making and metalwork, is at what point does this spool, and breaking down the cost of what it costs to make one set of earrings from a spool of metal material, right? Don't worry about it. Just make your earrings. It's cool.
Yeah.
Like when it becomes to the point in time where it's going to cost you more to figure out the cost than it actually costs, then just leave it as a business expense.
Mhm.
I think my dad built his entire cabin, Tetons, as a business.
With leftover.
With leftover, he owned a lumber yard. So he's like, oh, I'm just going to scrap this because I don't have enough left. I'm like, that's right. So, I mean, but when it's just a small dollar amount that you're dealing with, you know, just don't worry about it. I think sometimes people overthink it, and those little dollar amounts aren't going to matter that much. And then you have big equipment and things like that to worry about too. Like, and the one other thing I will say, like, to watch out for as far as the IRS is, if you are repeatedly using money on your business, they're gonna probably think that you have more of a hobby than you do a business. If you're not making a gallant effort to produce actual profit, they may consider it a hobby. So be aware of where you are, and if it starts to turn around, like where you're netting zero, or you're not making money off of it, then I wouldn't even worry about tracking anything and just consider it a hobby. I think that's it. Bookkeeping is really, so here's a look at a year in the life of small business. January, if you have employees, you have your fourth quarter employment returns for workers' compensation, paid family medical leave, unemployment, and your FICA, Social Security, Medicare, payroll tax return, which is called a 941. It reconciles all the deposits that you should have already made. You also in January have your federal unemployment if you have payroll. And then you have, if you paid somebody else, say Ellen, you wanted to do a conference and you wanted to co-teach with someone. Hi, Ollie. And you hired another painter and you paid them more than $600 to join you with this conference, then you have to think about issuing a 1099. So if you wholesale to someone as an artist and they pay you more than 1099 for a whole line of jewelry, for example, or a whole line of note cards, then they're probably going to issue you a 1099 as well. So that's January. And then January, you also have to think about Department of Revenue, excise tax returns. And most people who are making under, I think it's a $48,000 threshold now, they're on an annual filing. And most of it gets written off as a small business tax credit, as far as business and occupations goes. But you do have to take into consideration sales tax, because you're selling your products. Maybe not you, Ellen, because you're teaching, so that's a professional service, so you're a little bit different. But when you sell something, you have to charge sales tax based off of the location. So if you're at a show in Ballard, you should be charging Ballard sales tax rates and filing it with your excise tax return. So that can get a little complicated. And what I tell people is that the easiest way for sales tax for folks is to just set your price and just know that you're going to charge the tax in gross. And then that way, when you do your filing, Sometimes it's just easier to net it out that way, because there is, on the Department of Revenue's website, you can actually say this is how much of that revenue has the sales tax in it. I would reach out to somebody that's familiar with doing sales tax in gross and have them walk you through the calculations if you're not comfortable with it. There's some dividing. Accountants and bookkeeping, we just need a 4-function calculator, right? We're not math geniuses. We add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and that is it. So, and then
it can still be very hard.
Yeah, sometimes there's a string of it, but yeah. So, and that's pretty much January. And then monthly payroll deposits. If you have payroll, the IRS, if you have more than $2,500 in taxes that are remitted in a year, then they want you to be, those are the only people that can send in their taxes once a year are people who have less than 2,500 in deposits withheld. Best practice is to send them in monthly, and a lot of folks have to send them in on the biweekly plan, which is every time you make payroll, you basically have to deposit it within 3 days. So those are things to watch out for. But if you don't have payroll, it's really just paying attention to the Department of Revenue and when they said your filing deadline is, which is either monthly, quarterly, or annually. Most people that I work with that are artists that are small businesses, they're on an annual filing. So it's just January. It's not too bad. It's pretty easy if you're keeping track. The bad thing that I don't like the department, they charge tax on gross, right? So if you make $100,000, but you have $90,000 worth of expenses, you're paying taxes on $100,000, not 10, which is bummer. But what can we do? That's the tax world.
When should we care about depreciating expenses for equipment?
So most small businesses don't have to worry about that. If you
JP,
buy,
I bet JP
yeah, if you
has
buy
some-
something, I think the IRS's threshold is $2,500. So if you were to buy a piece of equipment that costs you more than $2,500, then you'll want to depreciate that. So you don't call it an expense, you call it an asset, because it has a useful life of more than 12 months. So, and I'm getting into accounting language, but if you can use it into perpetuity, like a kiln or a metal press or a punch or whatever, a wheel or like if I was a weaver and I had a big floor weaving loom, right? Those things are things that are going to last me over the life of a year, and they cost more than $2,500. So that's kind of the threshold when you would say, I now have an asset. But the IRS is really nice. They let you depreciate it in full the first year if you want to. So it's a wash on your tax return until you get into more types of like, well, maybe I need that $500 broken down as an expense for the next 5 years, right? For tax planning purposes, you don't want to have the full deduction taken because you want to piece that out so you have some expense over that 5-year period. And you can always ask an accountant is what I would do. Just come up and ask what the best tax position is. But I would worry about depreciation and bookkeeping until the end of the year.
That's one of the my favorite line items in my expenses is ask my accountant, because like anything that's there's actually that, like in QuickBooks there's like a little line item there and you're like, oh yeah, I'll just, so that when the bookkeeper comes, 90% of those she'll go through and like be like, no, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here. But then when I go see our tax accountant, our actual, the person who files our tax returns, she can, answer the rest of those, but they're all there. That is a very useful line item, I think.
I
Me,
love that line item. So, and for those folks that use online software, they don't have the Ask My Accountant. They have what's called uncategorized.
Uh-huh.
I like that one too.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know what category to put it in. Let me just stick it in this one. And it is nice. I appreciate people from my perspective. If I'm just coming in to do the bank reconciliations and payroll taxes or whatever, then I appreciate people that utilize that more than if they are just like, I don't know, put it in office supplies.
Yeah, and it goes back to that being consistent. Like if I know that if I don't know which category it should go in, then I know, okay, I'm not being consistent. I'll just wait and ask the person who's going to have to find it later and be really mad at me I'm going to be paying this person per hour to find this mistake that I've created. Like if I can avoid that, that has value.
It's very cost effective to just be upfront with it. I don't know.
Yeah. It's an easy one.
Yeah. I appreciate it too. It's nice when folks utilize that. And I do, like some of my small businesses, we just do all of their processing and we become pretty familiar with their line of business. But in the beginning, we even use that. If we don't know what was going on or we didn't get the receipt documentation, we'll put it
Ask
in.
my client.
Mm-hmm. We kind of use it unilaterally, right? We say, well, will you just go and look at your uncategorized expenses or your Ask My Accountant,
Mm-hmm.
tell me where those were supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and I think a lot of it too is if you do have a relationship with a bookkeeper and an accountant, or if they're one and the same person, then I think it's just about communication.
And from my perspective as like, I started out as a very small business, just myself. And then my partner and I made this LLC and, the business grew and, the complexity grew. And it's just been like every step of that has been like having a good relationship with a bookkeeper. And it's something, in retrospect that like as when I was smaller, I wish I had done sooner. And so that's just something I would put out there, the sooner you develop that relationship with somebody who actually knows what they're doing and can give you great guidance, it seems like it's an expense that might be extravagant, but it is not. It's such there's so much value there. I really have appreciated and it's something you have to learn anyway, so you might as well learn it quickly and not be punished constantly. Like I can attest to that.
Yeah, that is good advice. And I personally, I don't know a lot of accountants or bookkeeping people. And I don't really ask them this question, but if it's a small business or somebody who's just starting out or a small nonprofit, I give people an hour of consultation for free.
Yeah. Well,
You just
pretty sure you gave me many, many hours, but
yeah. Well, but I'm on the board, so that's my board donation. But I just think that the more, because anyway, it's a relationship thing for me. Like if I would rather have somebody start out on the right foot and have good information that I give them for free, so that if they do come to me or they do go to an accountant or a bookkeeper, it's not a jumbled mess and they don't end up paying a fortune to have somebody fix it. Because it's just expensive and time consuming. I always put those projects on the back burner. I've got like 3 right now and I'm like, I don't want to. I want to fix your mess. But it's for a bigger company that should know better. But yeah, so it's always worth asking too. Like I just need somebody to walk me through the software. The nice thing too about the software companies that are out there is you could just call their support line and they're not going to charge you. They have all of them have tutorials that are handy, and most of them will refer you to somebody who's familiar with that product. The Wave one is free. It's got some clunky stuff. I am not affiliated with them in any way, but I do have a couple of clients that use them because it is free and it gives them everything that they need. QuickBooks Online has tutorials and videos out the yin yang. And they also, with QuickBooks, if anybody else uses them, they do have like Find a Pro Advisor, and you can generally just send out a message. And then it never hurts to ask either. Like, can I just pick your brain? It'll probably take 15 minutes. I just have a couple of quick questions, and and see what it is. They're not, and ask what the charge would be.
A lot of it too for me has been just learning the language of accounting, because there is a language like there is for any whatever occupation. And so like learning to know what the question is to ask and how to ask it, and that's been a process, and that's just been making mistakes, but then developing that relationship with our bookkeeper in particular, she knows my shortcomings, and so that's been really helpful. Like she can anticipate where I'm going to blow it. So
yeah. Well, I learned that I was part of a software implementation at one of my positions. I don't know how this CFO got stuck doing software implementation, but and what I learned during that process is that no matter what side of the fence you're on, chances are somebody's green is different than your green, right? And so even if you're using the same words, they may not have the same meaning on both sides, and you end up arguing the same point just because somebody was using the same words, or you get misinformation because you asked a question using some terminology that's a different interpretation in a different profession. And so you got an answer back, but you're like, how does this make sense? And what I did learn, and that was also when I was working at a social services agency. So I was around social workers, and they're like, I'm not even going to try to talk to you in accounting. About accounting. So you can learn my language and then we'll go from there. So it's always, I would say, like, if you are getting that feeling or vibe from a bookkeeping professional or an accountant where you just don't feel like you're on the same page and they're not making an effort to make sure that you're on the same page, it might be time to look for somebody else, because you want to make sure that you're getting the information because you don't know what you don't know. And so it's also hard to know what questions to ask. So it's good to find somebody that will give you information before you ask for it. So when I do, because I also do like, can you just do a quick review and make sure we're doing stuff right? Sure. So you can always ask for those too. And I'll look at it and be like, well, it looks fine. Like there's nothing ever wrong as long as you're consistent. And here are some things that you might want to consider in tidying up. And I always followed up with like, and here's why. If you want to know the bigger reasons behind it, then here's why. I think it's just as much about educating people as making sure that their money's straight.
I'm going to jump in because we're over time, and we have another call scheduled with you. It's funny, we thought we would talk about accounting on this call and then taxes on the next one, but we sort of mingled them, so we'll have to think about if we're going to take a deeper dive on our next call, or maybe we'll just have a whole new group on the next call, so we repeat. I'm not quite sure. I guess we'll have to think about that. But does anybody have any last quick questions for Candace before we wrap up?
That's great. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
I think we will take a deeper dive into the tax return on the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in June?
That's June 19th at the same time.
Cool.
Yep.
That's a Friday, yeah, and like
Friday at 2.
3 weeks or so or something.
My mom's birthday.
Oh, it's your mom's birthday.
She doesn't live here though, so it's fine.
You can invite her to the
Oh my gosh, she would be like, I don't even know what you're, I don't even, can you balance my checkbook?
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah.
Let's say goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll go ahead and end the call.